So I would like to welcome everyone. My name is Hillary. I'm the Adult Services Librarian at Morrill Memorial Library. And I am very excited and honored to have with us tonight author Sam Farmer, who is here to talk about his experiences and his writing. So Sam, welcome, and go ahead and take it away.
Thank you very much, Hillary. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for carving out time out of your busy days to be here. I'm very grateful for that. My name is Sam Farmer. I'm 52 years old, and it wasn't until I turned 40 or so that I learned that I was autistic. And the past few years have been very challenging for me in many respects, as maybe they have been for some or all of you, in the sense that my particular autism profile is such that I can be very sensitive to things like toxicity and people not being kind to each other. I'm very sensitive to confrontational types of situations. And so as you can imagine, all of the divisiveness that we've been experiencing in our political discourse, culturally, racially, too much of this kind of us versus them tribalism that you hear about on the news and that you learn about. And above all that, the fact that I was witness to an incident that could very easily have escalated to a hate crime. Thankfully, it didn't. Grateful for that. But all of it begs the question, with all of this toxicity and division and undesirable things that we see going on in society in recent years, what can we do to counter that? And in my opinion, a really good way to try to counter that is simply to perform what I would consider to be acts of goodwill. And I consider the publication of my book to be just that. It's kind of like my act of goodwill to the world, maybe at a time when we could really use a lot of this sort of thing. It's a book with many, many stories from my own life experiences, stories where I struggle with certain things, where I try certain things and fall flat on my face, other stories where I triumph when maybe it's not likely that I would. Stories from a life of an autistic man who for the better part of his life didn't even know it. Although I was aware of my learning disability, I grew up being aware of that, with it having been diagnosed in the early 70s when I was about 3 years old. Very fortunate to have had that early diagnosis. The special education that I was entitled to as a result of that learning disability proved to be very beneficial in setting me up for future happiness and success. But above all, in addition to the stories, is plenty of self-help content that I've gathered over the years that stem from these kinds of experiences. Ideas and insights into how you can carve out happiness and success in life in spite of all the challenges and types of adversity that we face. And my hope is that those who do choose to read the book can actually use it, ideally, to try to carve out better lives for themselves. My parents, my mother and father, were both in what I would call the helping professions. My mother as a social worker, a marital and family therapist, and my father as a doctor. The book was written in their collective memory, to honor their memory of giving so much, not only to their respective clienteles, but also to me and to my brothers. And when my mom passed away, which was about 5 years ago, I started to write about my experiences with autism. I started out writing blogs and articles, and that eventually led to the idea to write my book, which is called A Long Walk Down a Winding Road, Small Steps, Challenges, and Triumphs Through an Autistic Lens. And even though I'm autistic, I wrote the book so that it might be beneficial to people who are autistic and non-autistic alike.
Promise
In the
people that I'd be on my worst behavior. I gave my word, so don't make me.
And in the sense that many of my challenges, the challenges that I've had that I write about, I know to be common among many of us, autistic or non-autistic. Primarily, I'm writing about challenges in developing various social competencies, developing skills around awareness of self, awareness of others, how to rise above bullying, workplace success, parenting, and what I would call marriaging in terms of my marriage and my experiences as a father to my son, who is also autistic. And from the perspective, not just of me as a father and a husband, but all that I learned from my parents growing up. So a lot of that kind of self-help content for those, who are interested in gaining insights into those sorts of things from somebody who's talking from an autistic perspective. But above all, most predominantly in the book, I'm writing about the process and all I learned while learning how to love who I am, self-esteem building. My mother, God bless her, had the wisdom to place a great deal of emphasis on positioning me to eventually have a strong sense of self, to take pride in who I am. And so for anybody looking to build self-esteem, to learn how to love who they are, this book is very, very relevant. A lot of emphasis in particular placed on that. And I think of my life as kind of being divided into 3 phases, is the way I think about it. My life's kind of started out in what I call in the book, my partially informed phase of life. Partially informed in the sense that I was well aware of my learning disability, but not yet aware that I was autistic. And again, there are a lot of stories, one of which entailed an experience that I had on a trip to Israel with my family. We were driving along in our tour guide's car. We were in a place, I can't remember which, of great historical significance. He was talking a great deal about it. I was sitting in the back seat. And the only question that I could really think to ask was, Yaron, how many miles per gallon does your car get? The awareness aspect of what I was going through and the difficulties that I had in being aware of my surroundings, being connected and in tune with my environment, all things that as I got older, I was able to improve upon in small steps over long periods of time. Another story where in 5th grade, we went to visit the school that would become the private school that I would go to for my middle and high school years. By some miracle, because my mother and I were visiting with the director of admissions, and I had the nerve to say to his face, I'm not comfortable here. I don't like it here, in my kind of brutally honest, sort of cold tone of voice. And what I would give to have known what my mother must have said to the director of admissions that led to me getting accepted into the school nonetheless. Stories like that. And then phase 2 sort of happened, which I call the enlightened phase of my life. Came shortly after I learned of my Asperger's diagnosis. For those of you who may be unfamiliar, Aspergers Syndrome is one possible diagnosis on the autism spectrum. It doesn't exist today in recent years. If you look in the DSM-5, the diagnostic manual that mental health clinicians often use to make diagnoses. But back around the year 2010 or so, when I was diagnosed, it was a legitimate diagnosis. And then autism spectrum disorders were rethought in the version of the DSM that would come out a few years after. But me and many others still aren't shy about revealing that diagnosis, even though today it is no longer a legitimate one. It's still legitimate to people like me and to others. And it dawned on me soon after I was diagnosed and as I was learning about what Asperger's entails, that it dawned on me, you know, in order to build a strong sense of self and really be proud of who I am, it's going to be very, very important for me to be able to come to terms and accept and actually ultimately embrace this diagnosis. Because if I don't, how am I ever going to truly be happy? I write a lot in the book about acceptance as being a key ingredient to the self-esteem building process. Acceptance is of critical importance. When I was in high school, I was offered the opportunity to take the SATs untimed. And because I really couldn't come to terms with my then known learning disability, I very angrily rejected that offer, insisting that I be evaluated on the same terms as my non-autistic peers in school. In many respects, I just wanted to be like all of them. And in retrospect, I think I was in the wrong. I would have been better off accepting the learning disability for what it was. I certainly would have been better off being able to take the SATs on time, because as it was, I ran out of time on the verbal section. I didn't even come close to finishing the reading comprehension questions, all of which, of course, would be marked wrong. By some miracle, I was able to make it into my first choice school, but I very well might not have, because my verbal score was subpar at best because of arguably a bad choice that I made that stemmed from not being able to accept a key aspect of who I knew I was. Acceptance. Much, much easier said than done to achieve, but certainly possible. If I was able to accept not just my learning disability and later on my autism spectrum diagnosis, certainly others can, and many others thankfully have. And I write a lot about that in terms of one aspect of the self-help content. The other thing I write about is the importance of having realistic expectations, not just of yourself, but of other people. I learned that if you expect too much from people, if you expect things that you're in no position to expect, then you're setting yourself up to be let down, which often I was. And that certainly can erode self-esteem. I often expected other people to give me their attention whenever I asked for it. I expect them to just automatically know that I was learning disabled and to tailor their expectations of me accordingly based on that. I expected them to not pursue what they wanted in order to cater to my desires in given situations. And you can imagine the fallout from that and the effect that that had on my social life, etc. That many of these lessons that I learned as I got older, and that no doubt contributed to the person that I am today, thankfully happy, successful, stronger inside than I was in my formative years. That a lot of lessons were learned the hard way. I learned to learn many of those lessons the hard way, others not so hard. And I write a fair amount about that in the book as well. I'm very, very fortunate. I'm very, very fortunate to have been born an optimist. Both of my parents were. They instilled that sense of optimism in me and in my brothers. Even if the reader of my book isn't an optimist, it's never ever too late to become one. You can make a conscious choice to become an optimist. And when you have that glass half full rather than half empty attitude, it becomes a lot easier to be able to learn with an open mind and grow into somebody who you want to be, if you feel that in your life you may not quite be there yet. And I write a lot about the importance of getting help. I was, again, very fortunate to have access to my mother's wisdom, with her being a social worker. My father had a great talent for enthusing me to get involved in activities that he knew I would be proficient and good at, and that would therefore help self-esteem. He was 3 for 3 in steering me towards music in terms of my abilities as a musician. having steered me also towards being a tennis player and a cross-country runner, where relatively early on in my school career, I was able to make both of those teams and compete for my school. Huge for self-esteem building, to be able to cultivate those sorts of interests and find that you're really good at them, good enough to really go far with them. The fact that I've also always been a good person at heart. I was very fortunate to meet people who were able to become my friends, who were able to look past all of my challenges around social skills and social competence, my oftentimes lack of tact, saying the wrong things at the wrong time, all of my idiosyncratic, quirky behaviors that would often draw negative attention, that they were able to see past all that to really see the good in me, in the core of who I am. Another aspect that I write about, whereby I really was very fortunate. And when you've had all the good fortune that I've had, I think it's helpful to write a book like the one that I did. And I've got a bunch of articles and blog posts as well that get into this. To be able to share those ideas and wisdom with other folks who may want to improve themselves in these areas. The book in that regard, I'll admit, is not necessarily for everybody. If my challenges are the challenges that other people face in terms of social competence, rising above bullying, self-esteem building, parenting, marriaging, workplace success, then there's some relevance of this book to the reader. But I feel it's core to the human experience that whatever we do, we can't necessarily satisfy everybody. We win some of our battles, we lose others. We all have a degree of baggage. We all have a degree of imperfection, all of which I feel is perfectly fine and perfectly acceptable because they're all core to the human experience. And if there's anything that we all have in common, it's that at the end of the day, we're all human beings. The third phase of my life, which I feel that I am still in to this day, is the phase that I refer to as my paying it forward phase. What I call my paying it forward mission started with the passing of my mother. I acknowledged as I was eulogizing her at her funeral, how much she had done for me as I was growing up. But when she passed away, I could no longer pay her back for all those things that she had done. So instead, I came up with this idea somehow that why not pay it forward and to do so in her memory. That all of the thanks that I would have showered on her, why not shower that on other people? And so I began to write with that intent, and I continue to do so to this day through my author talks like this one, through presentations I've given to others as an autistic self-advocate, as I've been called. And so that was the beginning of my paying it forward mission, which continues to this day. So I'm in my paying it forward phase. Another key aspect of who I am, of my autism profile, is that I glean a lot of satisfaction and a lot of happiness from being able to help others. And so that's what I do to kind of nurture my soul, to maintain happiness in a world in which too many people find it challenging to be happy. Thank you, Alex, by the way. Thank you. This is my way of giving back. So I thought I would share, before we wrap up here, I've got two passages in the book that I'd like to read to you. The first passage is at the end of my chapter where I write about learning how to love yourself, about self-esteem building. And the chapter concludes as follows. If you are less than content, would like to feel better about who you are, and feel that the time is now to make a change, my hope is that you will find at least some of what I have written in this chapter and in this book to be useful to you. Working to build self-esteem was no cakewalk for me, though the time and effort involved were more than worth it. There is no greater gift than to love who you are. If you are ready to embark on this journey, consider the following analogy to the American Civil Rights Movement. Though there is considerably more work to be done with respect to improving race relations in the United States, the Civil Rights Movement did achieve lasting results and positive change in the face of all kinds of odds. And it did so without any help from the internet or social media, after centuries of slavery and in the midst of Jim Crow era segregation and discrimination. Furthermore, it required the efforts, struggles, and sacrifices of an immeasurable number of people, a multitude of individual acts of courage, protests and marches, federal government involvement, a timeless letter written from a jail cell, and epic court battles to succeed. The key takeaway: meaningful change is hard, slow to come, often achieved in the face of adversity, and entails many small steps taken over a long period of time. These are the ingredients of change that allow it to take hold and last, whether in society at large or deep inside oneself. If you are up to the challenge, and I hope you are, you deserve it. The final passage that I'm going to share with you comes in the final chapter of the book, where even though this is by and large a memoir with self-help content interwoven, this is a chapter in which I write about looking ahead to the future. And as those of you who are with us today who are parents, I'm sure can attest to, when you look to the future as a mother or a father, you can't help but have your hopes and dreams for that future revolve around your child. Much of this chapter, which even though I don't consider it to be the most important chapter in the book, it's my personal favorite. Much of this chapter was written with tears in my eyes, because as you can imagine, there's a great deal of emotional power when you're writing about your own child. In this case, my son, who I said earlier is like me, also autistic. And this passage reads as follows. On Thanksgiving Day in 2018, a friend recruited me to volunteer with her at a local soup kitchen. As great as it felt to be reaching out to the hungry and homeless, that feeling paled in comparison to how awestruck I was when I heard how difficult it is simply to secure an opportunity to volunteer at the kitchen. My friend asked one of the folks who manages the kitchen about when she should call in so that she would be one of the first to be considered for a volunteer position for Christmas Day that year. Even then, she could not be sure that she would be able to offer her services. Oftentimes, she called the instant the kitchen was scheduled to start fielding calls from would-be volunteers, only to be repeatedly greeted by a busy signal. After hearing this, I thought to myself, if only goodwill of this magnitude could assume a life of its own, take flight, and extend itself to where it is needed the most. Goodwill toward our planet, goodwill between differently minded people, enabling them to say no to hostility, to agree to disagree, to reach out and compromise, or to at least learn to peacefully coexist. Goodwill that keeps a would-be bully from targeting someone, or that levels the playing field for those who currently play according to different sets of rules. Yes, I admit that I am engaging in utopian wishful thinking, but wouldn't it be nice? This is the kind of world in which my son proceeds with his life, though only in my dreams. And that's all he wrote, for now at least. One thing that I would like to do before I wrap up here and open things up to questions is to share my website with all of you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. If you folks can see this, this is www.samfarmerauthor.com. As you can see, it talks about my book, how to buy the book. In case any of you are interested, these buttons take you to my Amazon author page and a couple of reviews. Information about me, a little more about myself than what I've said tonight. And my favorite page, which is my media page. When I was working with a publicity company around when my book was published almost 2 years ago, I had a very effective publicist who helped me establish some meaningful relationships with folks at various media outlets. And what we have here is a pretty long list, as you can see, of all kinds of articles that, like my book, are written from an autistic point of view that cover a range of subjects, at least some of which I'm sure we can all relate to. Blog posts, other items for additional reading, additional to the book, and a bunch of videos, interviews, etc. that we have here. Events. Here's today's event. I've got other events that are coming up that I post here. Resources covers organizations with whom I have relationships, who I feel are doing really good work for the autism spectrum community, and others who are what's called neurodiverse. That'll be a gradually growing list, and a field here where you can subscribe if you'd like to my mailing list. People on my mailing list receive notifications of upcoming book talks. Every time I publish an article, the first people who find out about the publication are the people on my mailing list. You can sign up for it here. And then the contact page, that if any of you want to reach out to me about anything, I invite all of you, if you so choose, to reach out to me. These messages here, when they're submitted, go directly to my email inbox, and I always respond. So feel free to reach out using the contact page here. And that pretty much covers it. Do any of you have any thoughts, any questions for me before we wrap up? Feel free to jump in.
Okay. Thank you everyone again for attending tonight. And of course, Sam, thank you so much for your insights and for sharing your thoughts and your work with us.
Thank you very much, Hillary. Thank you.